Elisa Maza cosplaying as Belle and wielding her gun is a moment.
Amazing.
It's time.
We're live.
We're live.
Jalapeno.
So we're going to, this is our inaugural podcast. This is a podcast. Is that what we're doing here?
Podcast stream
live. It's called Disco Lemonade, and we're going to talk about things that we like. So, just some introduction. I'm Kate Tabulous. I'm a cosplayer. Sometimes I'm on Twitch, and I love Gargoyles.
I'm Corey. I am a comedian, improviser, creative in general. Sometimes I perform improv. Sometimes I do actually just Star Trek improv these days.
Really? Just Star Trek
Star
improv?
Trek
I mean,
improv.
That's not a really impressive thing to have on your resume. So our topic for today is Gargoyles, the beloved... Is it beloved? It is by me.
Us.
It is by me, and I've been, talking about it a little online recently and learning there are people out there who truly do remember and love this show and how important it is. So we have so much to cover. So we're just going to start simply with what is Gargoyles. Gargoyles is an animated series that aired in 1994 on the Disney Channel, created by Greg Weisman. I guess it was successful. I actually don't really know its like media impact in the moment. I mean, it aired for 3 seasons, so it had to have been pretty successful.
I remember people talking about it when it was out. Like, I just remember it having the reputation for being a good show.
Okay, yeah.
But I never really watched it.
So in 94, 95, we would have been children. So I think I came back to Gargoyles in high school. I went through a Disney phase. Like, the whole reason that I'm a hardcore Kingdom Hearts fangirl today is this obsession I had in high school, like this renaissance, if you will, of Disney, right? And so I watched Gargoyles pretty religiously on whatever Disney Toon rerun show there was. And then later in college, tried to find it again. I had to obtain Gargoyles in college by joining one of those file share, you remember, LimeWire-y thing. This is so much, this is before Netflix, this is before the internet really could internet the way it does today. And it took me 6 months to download the Gargoyles series on a file sharing system because someone has to be online that's also file sharing. So that was the way I rewatched Gargoyles for the last almost 30 years. Next year's the 30-year anniversary of Gargoyles. And so I watched it on crappy MP4 files until it now became available again on some streaming services.
That's, yeah.
LimeWire, yes.
It's a blast from the past. I watched it for the first time over the pandemic on your recommendation.
Oh, yeah. I made you watch it.
Yeah, well, because we're talking about cartoons as we're wont to do. And, you'd mentioned I think you told me some plot points on it and just various things. And I was like, wait, what? This isn't a Disney Channel show?
Oh, my gosh.
And I watched it and was immediately obsessed.
So had you heard of it before I told you to watch it during the pandemic?
I had heard of it before. I just did. Well, I didn't grow up with cable, so I watched a lot of like PBS growing up. So I watched Arthur for years and years. Like through high school, I watched Arthur.
So we should do an episode on Arthur.
We probably should. And Arthur was still going up until a few years ago, which is crazy.
Really?
Yeah, they had a final episode where they did a Where Are They Now, which was very emotional.
Okay, Arthur.
But I had no idea it was still going on. So all that being said, I didn't watch a lot of Disney Channel stuff unless I was at a friend's house or something.
Okay.
Nor really Cartoon Network stuff or any Nickelodeon stuff of the day. But, so Gargoyles wasn't on my radar. The only thing I really knew was this, I brought it in today, this BK Kids toy that I don't know if you can tell on camera, but it has little sparks in the background. Which I feel like is a pretty cool kids toy. They don't do it like this anymore.
Well, yeah, didn't they have a Barbie toy at one point that had sparks, and they discontinued it because fire. Influencer hand.
I live again! Yeah.
So did you get that as a child?
I got that as a child.
This is legit. This is your
Let's
item.
see if it's like a I think I wrote my name on it even. It's faded away. See if there's like a date on it. I don't know.
It's original. It's legit. This is a thing. This is a relic, an artifact.
Yeah. Straight up saved from however many moves I've had since then.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're both of an age where we might not have been exposed to it as children, right? Like when it was hot and when it was live. And I don't think we could have maybe appreciated the breadth of what this show really is. I do remember watching some Disney, home VHS tapes and seeing the trailer on some of those. And I think we have the trailer to pull up just so you can kind of see the excitement that was. Like, what is this? This is Disney. This is something unreal.
It is an age of darkness. Superstition and the sword rule. It is an age of fear. It is the age of gargoyles.
What could be strong enough to leave claw marks in solid stone?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's like the opening. I mean, I think there may have been a plan at some point to release the first 5 episodes as a Disney Channel like movie.
Okay, which makes sense because it is like 5. That was like a 5-parter pilot, basically.
Yeah.
A good detective trusts no one.
That's one thing we have in common. Everything's going according to plan.
Oh my god.
Yes.
Those images of Xanatos closing it out are just perfect. Just perfect. So if you can imagine coming to video in 1995. So yeah, I guess they did release those first 5 episodes as those first 5 episodes kind of, and that was the Disney Channel animated model at the time. Like if you remember Return of Jafar,
Yes.
that is actually just the first 5 episodes of the Aladdin animated TV show.
Oh, I did watch. So I did watch the Aladdin animated TV show.
Yeah.
Probably because it was on syndication or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
So that was the model. I mean, this was the 90s. This was Disney exploding. Like, this was such an important time for Disney expanding their brand into media. Like, so I think it's interesting that Gargoyles got picked up in this mix and became what it is. But let's kind of break down like what is the show exactly and what kind of makes it special. We have our mains. So we have our main character is Goliath, voiced by Keith David, who is Daddy, who is King, who is Lord. I mean, just fantastically diverse actor. Like the variety of his work is stunning. Everything from 2005's hit ATL to Requiem for a Dream, Rick and Morty, and everything everywhere in between. And so Goliath is our main gargoyle. The gargoyles, the main premise, the main conceit is the gargoyles have been put under a spell for 1,000 years, as they remind you every time you watch the show again with the opening credits. And they reawake in 1994, modern day Manhattan. Where they immediately team up with Elisa Maza, who's, I guess I would say the other main. She's
more or less
a fiery New York native detective. And then we have Goliath's crew of gargoyles. We have Brooklyn, Lexington, and Broadway. And then later they bring in Angela, Goliath's daughter.
Yeah.
Spoilers, kind of.
Goliath and Demona.
Yes. And that would take us to our main baddies as well. We also have the elderly Hudson.
Oh yes, Hudson.
And there's got to be a dog. So there's Bronx the dog. And those are kind of our main protagonists. And then we have our main baddies. So the reason the Gargoyles are resurrected starts with David Xanatos, who is like a really essential childhood crush of mine, I would say.
I could see that. He is
the ponytail.
He might be my favorite TV villain. He's
wow. Okay.
I mean, certainly up there, just because I really love those like anti-villains. Someone who he has clear wants. His wants aren't to destroy the Gargoyles, which I feel like would have been a very easy thing to do for a kids. But Xanatos could have been. He could have just been like a maniacal, like, I'll get those Gargoyles.
The villains are just as powerful and important as the protagonist in this story. And I think that is, it's just, the show is more good than it has any right to be. And the characters have more depth and complexity and humanity than they have any right to have. If we move ahead, Mitchell, we can see some images of Xanatos, and behind him we have his right-hand man, Owen, who, again, doesn't have to be a complex and interesting character, but actually is profoundly for a few reasons. And so they just build this world of all of these characters that have a depth that they have no right to have for it being a kid's show. And it's not over your head if you're a kid. Like, it's just so well written, and you are able to get into it even if maybe some of the deeper, darker stuff doesn't totally reach you. They convey complicated themes throughout the show, and I hope we're going to really get into a lot of them, but like in very simple, accessible ways. And the lore just constantly builds on itself. So to draw focus on like what's going on in this main plot, because we're gonna talk about Xanatos a lot.
Right.
Xanatos is the main guy. He is actually the guy that resurrects the Gargoyles, which really begs the questions, like, he's creating his own nemesis. Like, he's the main villain, but without him, there is no Gargoyles. There is no end to the spell that they were under.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And he has such a obsession with Goliath in particular, Gargoyles in general, Goliath in particular, to the point where he's dressing as him, where he's
trying to clone. He wants to clone the Gargoyles. He wants to make gargoyle robots. He wears a mech suit that makes him look like Goliath, the lead gargoyle.
Yeah, 100% based on Goliath. And yeah, but he's not. It's interesting because he helps them as often as he like doesn't help though. It's like as an antagonist.
Yes. His motives sometimes are unclear. It does come out throughout the show that Xanatos is really obsessed with immortality.
Right. That's kind of his clear villain want, I'd say.
So yeah, what he wants is power, and in his mind, power is living forever. And without giving too much away about, maybe, because our hope is that everyone's gonna go and binge the show like immediately because it's amazing. But without giving too much of his background lore away, he is a man who has knowledge of the past. He has knowledge of spells and magic and sorcery, but he's also a capitalist. He's a super wealthy dude who has access, who owns multiple companies, including one that specializes in genetic engineering and robotics. And so that, I think, is like, his role is so fascinating because it brings together what this show does that's so hard to do, which is it blends sci-fi and fantasy.
Yes.
Like, this is a world where clones and genetic, mutations and plot lines about the dangers of nanobots and science exist alongside plots about like golems and Merlin and Celtic lore almost seamlessly. And I think Xanatos does a really good job of embodying that because he's just obsessed with power, and he's obsessed with power in whatever form that takes, whether it's mastering the science or finding ancient scrolls and a spell for immortality.
Yes. He beautifully said. I don't think I could say it better myself. Yeah, 100% based on Goliath. And yeah, but he's not, it's interesting because he helps them as often as he like doesn't help though. It's like as an antagonist.
Yes. His motives sometimes are unclear. It does come out throughout the show that Xanatos is really obsessed with immortality.
Right. That's kind of his clear villain want, I'd say.
So yeah,
throughout the
what
whole
he
thing.
wants is power, and in his mind, power is living forever. And without giving too much away about maybe, because our hope is that everyone's gonna go and binge the show like immediately because it's amazing. But without giving too much of his background lore away, he is a man who has knowledge of the past. He has knowledge of spells and magic and sorcery, but he's also a capitalist. He's a super wealthy dude who has access, who owns multiple companies, including one that specializes in genetic engineering and robotics. And so that, I think, is like his role is so fascinating because it brings together what this show does that's so hard to do, which is it blends sci-fi and fantasy.
Yes.
Like, this is a world where clones and genetic, mutations and plot lines about the dangers of nanobots and science exist alongside plots about like golems and Merlin and Celtic lore almost seamlessly. And I think Xanatos does a really good job of embodying that because he's just obsessed with power, and he's obsessed with power in whatever form that takes, whether it's mastering the science or finding ancient scrolls and a spell for immortality.
Yes. He beautifully said. I don't think I could say it better myself. I feel like they had something that comes up a lot is like the Xanatos gambit, whereas like even when he loses, he wins, and that seemed like a very conscious move on the creator's part. To even when the Gargoyles win, Xanatos also wins because it's like he's like, oh well, I intended for them to destroy that thing because that was a prototype for this, and that means that it's working successfully. Or I had them break into a company. It turns out it was my company, and so then I can write it off as...
Oh my god, the level of deception and subterfuge, and just like... There's even a scene where Xanatos and his girlfriend Fox are actually playing chess on screen, but them playing chess is just a conceit for like the fact that they are actively manipulating the Gargoyles and whoever
the pack,
for their own...
believe.
Oh, and the pack, yeah. And the pack is a group of...
The pack, that's another wild concept.
What are they exactly?
So they're a group of mercenaries who have a TV show. Like they're almost like the like world within the world, or the show within the world version of, I don't know, like Ninja Turtles or Gargoyles, or like some sort of superhero group, but they're actually mercenaries in real life.
Yeah. In
the real life of the show.
And in the canon of the show, they're a TV show, so they're also
they're a
like
TV
celebrities. And what they don't know is that Xanatos owns everything, so he owns the media company that produces the TV show. And specifically, he's not looking for actors to bring together. He's looking for stuntmen who are actually all, of varying ambiguous degrees of like criminal backgrounds, we assume. I feel like they could have given us so much more on the pack's background.
Right.
Because they set it up so that anything could be infinitely explored. But they're a TV show, but they're also actual villains. And they come back again and again, not realizing that they are actually owned by Xanatos. Like, they don't even know that they're pawns, except for Fox, who is his girlfriend.
She was... I assumed Fox was in on it. Like,
Yes.
I think Xanatos met Fox first.
Yes.
And then she kind of helped him gather the rest.
Yeah, there's a lot about Fox that's unanswered in the show. Like, there's definitely background information about her that we don't get that we could. But we get the idea that Xanatos and Fox were dating, and she kind of becomes his lady liege.
Yeah.
And creates the pack, who are some villains who pop up again. We have a few other villains. The pack is introduced early in season 2, but we also have Demona, who is maybe the most complicated written villain of any show, but especially for a children's cartoon show. Like
there's a lot going on with Demona.
Her level of complexity is unreal and outrageous. She's just so well developed for no reason. Like, we don't need a villain to be developed. We've all seen Batman.
Right.
We've all seen Ninja Turtles. Sometimes
you just need someone to be like, I'll get you.
Yeah, not to neg on those shows, but like, you don't have to have a villain that makes sense. But wow, do they dive into the psychology of these villains?
Yeah, I feel like a common theme with the villains is vengeance and like letting revenge consume you, and to the point of not seeing your own flaws and faults. Because Demona is constantly blaming humans for her problems, and a lot of it was on her. Like, it really was her fault that the Gargoyles were betrayed in the first millennia. in the 10th century.
Yeah, 994 because they wake up in 1994, present day. It's like Demona's a really good, I won't say foil, but like Demona's a good counterpart to Xanatos because they're not friends. They're not
really
allies, but they work together sometimes because they're both, against the Gargoyles. Demona's the evil gargoyle. She's not with the clan. But Demona, I think you're right, is motivated by vengeance, whereas Xanatos is almost removed from vengeance. Like, he doesn't have these personal vendettas. He just wants power. So they're interesting, side by side. His just cold, calculated, industrialist badass next to a woman who's, basically broken by her need for vengeance.
In fact, one of the episodes I watched this morning, Cloudfathers had Xanatos doing kind of classic evil stuff, but it was very out of character for him. He even comments "I'm trying my hand at classic villainy," and he has a vat of acid above the Gargoyles.
The vat of acid. You're not a real comic book show if you don't have a vat of acid.
But even that was it was just a plan to get the Coyote trickster god, this Native American trickster god, captured somehow. It wasn't real villainy. He had no actual animosity toward the Gargoyles.
Yeah, he's I don't even want to kill you, but I'm just doing this thing, and it's just pragmatic for me.
Yeah.
Where Demona is all emotion and all vengeance to the point of being completely irrational, and Xanatos is kind of irrational too, in the way he cooks up these weird plots and has people working for him that don't even know they're working for him. The level of subterfuge is clearly a sign of some kind of psychosis. But in his mind, it's all very, I want money, I want to live forever, and I want my lady by my side. And we see Xanatos evolve a little bit too.
I bet.
I feel like
practically allies by the end
Xanatos
of the season
is their ally by the end of the series. And I think Demona, to me, maybe this is a hot take, I think Demona is irredeemable.
At this point.
I don't think that there's a redemption for her character.
Yeah, I mean, I guess within the world having 1,000 years of just revenge and hate through your mind, it's really hard to come back from that. Even Macbeth, it seems like he was having some sort of redemption. He felt that he could fall in love again, and there was some sort of something there.
Oh man, Macbeth. So Macbeth is another. I put him in the villains category, but I feel a weird way about Macbeth because Macbeth is someone who is magically linked to Demona. They're immortal together, and he definitely is a foe for the Gargoyles in the modern day settings. But when we learn his backstory and more about him, he really just seems like a victim of circumstance. He always kind of seemed like a stand-up guy who just got caught up in some crazy shit.
I mean, no exaggeration, and almost literally Shakespearean levels of subterfuge in his backstory.
Intentionally Shakespearean. His name is Macbeth.
Right, which is, I think he's kind of an amalgam of from the Macbeth from the play, and then also the historical figure.
Yeah,
seems like.
Yeah, there's some overlap there.
But and the idea is that they are immortals and they can only die by each other's hand.
Which is an insane premise for a children's show, and what they do with it is even more incredible. Just the legs, every concept, every lore piece that they put into the show has such legs. It's just so well done. It's so impressive.
And their fight scenes are so good because they feel each other's pain too. So they're punching each other, and they do such a great job in the actual fight choreography of it. Demona will punch Macbeth, and then she'll recoil, and he'll punch her, and then double over, and it's kind of comedic, but also tragic because they don't have to be doing that. They don't have to be fighting each other. It's clear. It's putting in something literally that is something that they're setting up metaphorically, which is vengeance and hate only hurt yourself.
Perfectly. So it is we use the word ironic and irony a lot, but it is actual literary irony. This is an intentional move on the writers, and it's beautifully executed with the artistry of the design of the characters, of the animation.
And then there's Hunter, the Hunter, which is
the Hunter.
We haven't even gotten to like plot. We're still talking about characters,
well,
and it's still so complex.
And I think the reason I kind of in my head is like, how do I describe what Gargoyles is? I start with the characters because in building each character, you realize, you know, each of their stories is the lore of this huge story that they're all interconnected in. I do think it's a cool thing that they do in the show, the way the story is, there are two stories, you know, there is 1,000 years ago and then there is today. And it's so obvious that the creators and the writers had all of that planned out so that we constantly can go back to the very first episode and like 1,000 years ago, here's what they were doing. We can constantly go back to that and see how everything in the last 1,000 years has been storyboarded out by the writers because it all plays out. It's a 1,000-year story arc. I mean, that's pretty insane.
And especially with the amount of time travel in this show.
A lot of time travel.
That's I really do like the way they do time travel because they do it in a way that's like, oh, it actually doesn't matter. Like whatever you do in the past, like it doesn't matter because you already did it in the past.
But then how did you do it the first time? That is still something that
there's
like...
a few paradoxes that are like,
but
okay.
you can't get past that with time travel. Like you just have to let it go with time travel stuff.
But I feel like narratively that is a good way to do time travel of like, oh no, we can't use, you can't fix anything. No matter what you do in the past, it's not going to really change anything because, you know, time is linear and
Goliath, there's an episode where Goliath is having a dream of the future. He mistakenly thinks that he has abandoned his clan for 40 years and he comes and sees this sort of like cyberpunk apocalyptic future. And in his dream, you know, he comes back and they're like, oh, you're back. You've been gone for 40 years. Can we use your magic time travel device, please, to fix this? And he has this beautiful speech about how you can't do that. It's not going to work because time is like a river correcting itself, you know, the way it flows over. It's actually
always going to reach the ocean.
Yeah, it's kind of like a beautiful way to think about time travel and without, you know, getting into what nerds like to get into, which is like all the, you know, it's like, well, this doesn't work because time travel paradox. But like they make it so that it can be palatable in a children's show setting. It's like, yeah, I just accept this and it works as an adult or as a kid.
And there's even like first episode that had the Phoenix Gate, the time travel MacGuffin.
Yeah. There's a lot of MacGuffins in the show too, which is they expertly introduce magical objects throughout those first few episodes, building up to the mid-second season arc, which is all about discovering the third race and all these magical creatures that are tied together in this multiverse of mythology that kind of is Gargoyles.
Well, so the episode that had the Phoenix Gate where they go back to the back to 994.
994.
And Goliath gives a speech to young Demona, and thinking that okay, that's going to change, and then immediately after, present day Demona is like, I remember all of that, and it changed nothing, just because, which makes sense once you realize what her actual story is. Like, she went through so much that a little speech is really not going to do anything to counteract the years and years of hatred
and it already happened.
Right. Time
is a river. It kind of gets into interesting questions about like fate and destiny too, I think, as well. I'm so glad that you brought up that episode. So there is an episode. It's episode season 2, episode 8, Vows, where all of our characters at Xanatos' wedding go back in time. And it is, I'm glad you brought that up because to me, it's one of my, not my feels-worthy moment, but it is my runner-up for my feels-worthy moment. Because, Demona also tries to talk to her younger self. She even says to her younger self, if I have to beat this lesson into you, I will, and physically gets involved with her younger self. So it's like this idea that Demona tries to say, don't be such a fool, don't be so weak. And then Goliath comes to young Demona to say, don't be so hard, stick true to your love. But neither of them changes, the flow of time. But I think that moment for me, watching Goliath go into the past, because when we are introduced to the characters, we quickly learn that Demona is a betrayer and she becomes the enemy. And Goliath kind of moves on. And that episode is the first time that he kind of circles back to like, well, I was in love with Demona at one point. We were lovers. And when he is pleading to Demona's younger self, you kind of I think it's one of the only times you really see Goliath's like heartbreak. Because for the most part, you're just like, he acts like he and Demona never dated. You know, it's like, I don't even know that bitch. Like, we're not even a thing. But in that moment, you do kind of see that he feels that he has lost the love when he's trying to desperately kind of speak to Demona before. And I do love that moment.
Do you want to play the clip? Give a shout out to our lovely engineer.
Yeah, Rhythm Jenkins, everybody. Mitchell is running the show.
Hey, guys.
making it pop. This seems good. She just beat the crap out of herself. Seems like a scene worthy of...
Yeah.
Are you injured?
The others, all gone. What am I to do?
Do nothing.
Nothing?
Do not worry. Do not wait or look for this catastrophe. Live in the moment. Attend the petty jealousies and angers that prey upon your heart. Fortify yourself with love and trust, and you need not fear this future. But most of all, fulfill the vows of love you make, for they can surely save you.
I shall. You have my oath.
I had hers once, too. I am not sure I remember the incantation.
I do. Des Legrate, Muri Tempi, et Intervalli.
So, yeah.
I think we found our ticket home.
If I didn't fear the damage you would do to the time stream, I'd gladly leave you here.
But you won't. Because you didn't. Time travel's funny that way.
And then, like, Xanatos is just, like, along for the ride. Like, Goliath and Demona are battling their history and their demons, and Xanatos is like, oh, yeah, by the way, this is how I got rich, you know?
Right.
I'm just here to go on a casual trip to the past. It's his wedding day. Xanatos knew he wanted to do this on his wedding day, and Fox is totally down for it, too. She's like, yeah, we're just gonna... Can we use your magic time travel device, please, to fix this? And he has this beautiful speech about how you can't do that. It's not going to work because time is like a river correcting itself, you know, the way it flows over. It's actually
always going to reach the ocean.
Yeah, it's kind of like a beautiful way to think about time travel and without, you know, getting into what nerds like to get into, which is like all the, you know, it's like, well, this doesn't work because time travel paradox. But like they make it so that it can be palatable in a children's show setting. It's like, yeah, I just accept this and it works as an adult or as a kid.
And there's even like the first episode that had the Phoenix Gate, the time travel MacGuffin.
Yeah.
that
There's a
they
lot of
did
MacGuffins in the show too, which is they expertly introduce magical objects throughout those first few episodes, building up
that's
to
true.
the mid-second season arc, which is all about discovering the third race and all these magical creatures that are tied together in this multiverse of mythology that kind of is Gargoyles.
Well, so the episode that had the Phoenix Gate where they go back to the back to 994.
994.
And Goliath gives a speech to young Demona, and thinking that okay, that's going to change, and then immediately after, present day Demona is like, I remember all of that, and it changed nothing, just because, which makes sense once you realize what her actual story is. Like, she went through so much that a little speech is really not going to do anything to counteract the years and years of hatred
and it already happened.
Right. Time
is a river. It kind of gets into interesting questions about like fate and destiny too, I think, as well. I'm so glad that you brought up that episode. So there is an episode. It's season 2, episode 8, Vows, where all of our characters at Xanatos' wedding go back in time. And it is, I'm glad you brought that up because to me, it's one of my, not my feels-worthy moment, but it is my runner-up for my feels-worthy moment. Because, Demona also tries to talk to her younger self. She even says to her younger self, if I have to beat this lesson into you, I will, and physically gets involved with her younger self. So it's like this idea that Demona tries to say, don't be such a fool, don't be so weak. And then Goliath comes to young Demona to say, don't be so hard, stick true to your love. But neither of them changes, the flow of time. But I think that moment for me, watching Goliath go into the past, because when we are introduced to the characters, we quickly learn that Demona is a betrayer and she becomes the enemy. And Goliath kind of moves on. And that episode is the first time that he kind of circles back to like, well, I was in love with Demona at one point. We were lovers. And when he is pleading to Demona's younger self, you kind of, I think it's one of the only times you really see Goliath's like heartbreak. Because for the most part, you're just like, he acts like he and Demona never dated. It's like, I don't even know that. It's like, we're not even a thing. But in that moment, you do kind of see that he feels that he has lost the love when he's trying to desperately kind of speak to Demona before. And I do love that moment.
Did you want to play the clip? Give a shout out to our lovely engineer.
Yeah, Rhythm Jenkins, everybody. Mitchell is running the show.
Hey, guys.
making it pop. This seems good. She just beat the crap out of herself. Seems like a scene worthy of...
Yeah.
Are you injured?
The others, all gone. What am I to do?
Do nothing.
Nothing?
Do not worry. Do not wait or look for this catastrophe. Live in the moment. Attend the petty jealousies and angers that prey upon your heart. Fortify yourself with love and trust, and you need not fear this future. But most of all, fulfill the vows of love you make, for they can surely save you.
I shall. You have my oath.
I had hers once, too. I am not sure I remember the incantation.
I do. Deslegrate muri tempi et intervalli.
Yeah.
I think we found our ticket home.
If I didn't fear the damage you would do to the time stream, I'd gladly leave you here.
But you won't. Because you didn't. Time travel's funny that way.
And then like Xanatos is just like along for the ride. Like Goliath and Demona are battling their history and their demons, and Xanatos is like, oh yeah, by the way, this is how I got rich,
Right.
I'm just here to go on a casual trip to the past. It's his wedding day. Xanatos knew he wanted to do this on his wedding day, and Fox is totally down for it too. She's like, yeah, we're just gonna around and find out.
Yeah, and this is the episode where he talks about being a self-made man, and he literally becomes. That's how he gets his riches. Is
because he gave himself the starter coin, yeah.
And then wrote a note to himself that must have came in like 2 weeks before. He's like, okay, this is what I did step by step, and now you have to do this or else it doesn't work.
But don't worry, you will, because you already did.
Yes. That's the kind of thing where it's like, okay, there's a couple grandfather paradoxes that like don't.
I like that they're not bothered by it though.
And
it doesn't feel cheap or like we're just gonna sidestep it. It just feels like you don't need to. Just go for it. Go with it. It works.
Kind of makes sense of just like that's sometimes there are just weird mysteries in life sometimes.
Yeah. And I just want to point out, so in chat, Gargoyles in Kingdom Hearts has been a dream of mine for as long as Gargoyles and Kingdom Hearts have both existed. And because I'm a dork, I have written fan fiction where the Gargoyles are absolutely part of the Kingdom Hearts lore, because I know that you're not as familiar with the Kingdom Hearts.
No, not really.
But there is actually so much in Gargoyles that works with Kingdom Hearts, in that there's a lot of weird time travel stuff, a lot of weird, villains trying to, actually be the good guy by redoing the past. So it would fit well with Kingdom Hearts.
Is there much like TV show, like Disney Channel stuff in Kingdom Hearts? Okay.
I mean, and
no Darkwing Duck.
No, but definitely among the Kingdom
Bears.
Hearts fans, like there is a wealth of like, man, if we could. Now it's interesting you bring up Gummy Bears.
Is the Gummy Bears in?
And this is not off topic. This is relevant to Gargoyles. So even though we're talking about Gummy Bears in Kingdom Hearts, it's all part of the multiverse of mythologies that Greg Weisman created.
Did he work on Gummy Bears?
No, I don't believe he did, but I do know that part of his original pitch for Gargoyles was that it would be like Gummy Bears. So a little more leaning more into the fantasy and less into kind of the urban sci-fi, cyberpunk, gritty Batman animated series type vibes we end up getting. Mm-hmm. The original pitch was more like Gummy Bears, and the Gargoyles were actually like pitched as like cute, like little gargoyles.
Oh,
and
interesting.
then in production, as things change and evolve, we get the design that obviously we're glad we ended up with. But Gummy Bears are also weirdly maybe the only Disney animated TV reference in Kingdom Hearts, because in Kingdom Hearts, the vessel that you use to travel between worlds is called a gummy ship. And gummy is like this magic material that makes inter-world, inter-reality travel possible.
Okay.
And I feel like no one talks about this in the Kingdom Hearts community. But like that's a reference to Gummy Bears.
Yeah.
Which leads me to believe like there is room for Gargoyles someday.
I hope so. Well, as I was rewatching this, I was just thinking there should just be a Gargoyles video game. Like if there was an Arkham style.
Was there ever a Gargoyles video game?
Maybe
like
a
Nintendo?
Super Nintendo,
yeah.
like a punching beat 'em up kind of thing. But if there was like an Arkham City style Gargoyles game, that'd be great. Where you just go around beating up random criminals, but then also doing the story missions. And the gliding aspect, I feel like would work really well in a video game because they don't fly.
They glide.
They glide, which I feel like they're pretty loosey-goosey with that in the narrative.
Yeah.
Sometimes they glide up to like an airship. It's like, how do they get all the way up there? Or how do they get on top of...
The winds in New York are
maybe
mighty updrafts.
And their castle is on the top of the tallest building in New York.
Well, they
tower.
use their claws to just like climb up the buildings.
True.
I do think it's interesting when they try to explain the science of the gargoyles. Mm-hmm. Like going back to this, what I love about the show is that it's fantasy, it's mythology, but it's also tied to what was hot and happening in the 90s, which is like gritty urban stories and also this kind of cyberpunk aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very Aeon Flux in some regards, too.
Aeon Flux. Add that to the list of episodes we need to do. I would love to revisit Aeon Flux. But yeah, they do sometimes try to explain, like, oh, well, the gargoyles can exist physically because they collect solar energy during the day. Like, Xanatos, in his obsession with them, hires Anton Savarius, who is another kind of side villain who's voiced by Tim Curry.
Oh, so good.
Like
we haven't even gotten into the voice actors.
Oh my god, the talent. So Tim Curry is Anton Savarius, a doctor who appears here and there throughout the series as this evil scientist. He's a great little add-on to Xanatos' whole psychotic villain arc. But he like hires him to figure out like, how do the gargoyles? Why do gargoyles? How do gargoyles? I want to be a gargoyle. Like, and so they do get into like the physics maybe of how some of that stuff exists.
Yeah, talking about how. Well, they even mention that like the energy needed for them to actually use their wings is astronomical, and we had to splice in electric eel DNA just so they could store enough energy. Otherwise, they'd be eating constantly. Yeah. Which is just so fascinating. Speaking of them storing solar energy, I wondered about, and I was surprised they didn't really bring this up, but when Demona is cursed, quote unquote, to not turn to stone but turn human during the day. Oh, spoilers. Right. Yeah, spoilers. Well, they mentioned several times throughout the series that gargoyles heal themselves when they are stoned. They can come back from mortal wounds, like as long as they turn to stone, they're good to go the next day. That's when they heal. Yeah. But if Demona is not doing that, is she not healing? Is she not sleeping? Is she not?
I wondered that too. Yeah, like what's the science of? But the thing is, there's like a scientific explanation for why gargoyles gargoyle. And we do get to see all this sci-fi stuff, but then there's also just like magic.
Right.
So Demona becomes human during the day because of Puck, the trickster, casting a spell on her. Mm-hmm. So it's great because there is this just like, it grapples with real things constantly and like the real implications of not just, like science and technological advancements, but they dive into like environmentalism. Yep. Because it was the 90s. It was the era of Captain Planet. Like this was a thing that we were doing in kids shows, was actively talking about environmentalism. And they get into all these real world consequences, and they have an episode about gun safety. Yeah. So they do all of that, and then at the same time are able to be like, but also magic. We do magic.
It's magic.
And it doesn't not work. It works.
And the interesting thing about the gun safety episode is when I did my first watch through a couple years ago and I saw it, it was like, oh, okay, this is the like after school special episode. Kind of rolled my eyes. And then watching it again, I felt like, oh no, this is actually they were trying to say something about not just, you know, the overall message of gun violence, but specifically building Broadway's character, giving him kind of a more, I don't know what you call it, just like more depth of he hates guns. Like throughout the series, he hates guns anytime he sees guns.
But
and
he loves cop shows and cop movies, and that like informs his whole interaction with the world. Is that he just wants to be like a noir guy. But then he also has that traumatic experience of accidentally shooting Elisa.
And it's rough too. Like there's a pool of blood under her. Yeah. I don't know if that got cut.
I do think
later,
on like the streaming services, like on Disney Plus, I do think they edit out the pool of blood. You do see blood on her body, but the pool of blood on the ground, I do think they maybe edited that out in some re-release. But I mean, she goes to the hospital and she's in the hospital and like the doctor is explaining what the bullet does to her body, which I think is something that a lot of episode of, you know, the week or like, here's your afternoon school lesson type of kid shows would skirt that. But they really try to make it clear, like, this is what bullets do. And I think that's insanely important. And they do revisit Elisa's gun safety by later an episode where Broadway is watching TV at her house, getting her gun out of a locked box.
Right.
So it's like, we know this happened 40 episodes ago, but we are sticking true to every plot point that we've planted, that Elisa did learn about gun safety. And Broadway now hates guns.
And it becomes kind of a plot point later on when during like the Oberon gathering arc, because he's trying to come steal Xanatos and Fox's child because for reasons I don't know how spoilery. I mean, I feel like if we're talking about there's going to be spoilers.
A show that's 30 years old also, there's going to be spoilers.
So the fact that Fox is half magic on her mother's side, much like Steven Universe.
Oh,
I just realized that. Man, that's the one we're going to do that eventually.
Steven
Universe.
Yeah.
Garnet, made of love. They make it a point that not only is Oberon weak against iron, which is like part of the mythology, the actual mythology of like the Fae race, but they make it a point to show that when Elisa draws her gun, he kind of recoils a bit because he realizes it's iron.
Right.
So the fact, but also in that episode, Xanatos' people, him and whoever else, shoot lasers at Oberon. If they had had regular guns, like any corner thug would have, that arc would have been way shorter.
That's interesting.
Like,
but in the gun safety episode, which is very early on, season 1, that episode also is about, I think we have it on the screen right now, Tony Dracon.
Oh right.
Who is he's just like an extra villain, you know, like Xanatos he's not metaphysical, he's not magical, he's just a dude, but he's a dude who's entrenched in the magic world because he just knows everything and kind of buys his way into the knowledge of all ancient magic. So sometimes to keep it fresh, we have some episodes with Dracon, who's just like a run-of-the-mill mob boss.
Probably the biggest mob boss in New York, but kind of boring in the scheme of things.
Well, yeah, next to Xanatos and next to like gods and monsters and clones, and you know, but they do sprinkle him in too. So we do have some episodes that are just good old-fashioned like cop episodes, like we're gonna stop the mobster, which I think is great, the way they can bounce back and forth between like we're going to another dimension or we're going back in time. Today we're just gonna stop Dracon from bringing laser guns onto the market. And they even kind of break down the difference between bullets and these hypothetical laser guns, which I think is them setting up for the rest of the show that they're not going to have traditional guns, because I'm sure that Disney doesn't want a show with bullets constantly flying, but they're able to use
up until
gun
then
violence.
There were guns. I mean, there were traditional guns up until that episode. I
mean, I just love how they're like, well, okay, guns would exist in this world, but we can't do that for reasons because kids. But we're going to write it into the plot, and we're going to teach a valuable lesson about gun safety. In this one episode, we're going to establish laser guns as a thing in New York in this time period.
Right.
So we don't have to have a bunch of bullets and blood because it is a kid's show. But also we're going to make a message out of it and make it make sense for the lore.
And it did seem like there was a conscious effort to, like, the cops had regular guns, and I guess that was probably okay just because they're authority figures or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, have you seen cop cars? Like, we can't buy nice things.
Right.
For regular cops are gonna have laser guns. Only rich private police owned by David Xanatos will have laser guns.
So yeah, Dracon. I guess Dracon was kind of I feel like he was kind of the way to set up, like, the Illuminati. I feel like his episodes were part of that, which is bonkers to me that the Illuminati is, like, a thing in this.
And
in
I
this
think
show.
it's important that, like, I think if we go back a slide 2, we had some pictures of Matt Bluestone, who is Elisa's partner. Elisa has a partner, Matt Bluestone, who, you know, he doesn't have a ton of focus, but he definitely is, like, a side character who's complex in his own rights. He's on slide 7. That's where it is. He's one of our sides.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
And he's obsessed. It's funny because he gets partnered with Elisa, who actually engages with magic people and, like, has to keep her knowledge of the gargoyles and all the crazy shit she's seen. She has to keep it secret from her regular partner. But she's actually partnered with a guy who's obsessed with the Illuminati and conspiracy theories. And this is before, like, the internet memed the Illuminati, you know, like, Illuminati confirmed. Like,
Yeah.
it was 1994.
I mean, I think it was out there
It was
for
out
sure.
there.
But, like, yeah, it was people circulating newsletters of, like, the Illuminati and UFOs. And so Matt Bluestone is almost like, as you were saying that, I was thinking he's almost like if Fox Mulder was paired with Scully, but Scully had, like, knowledge of all this, like, supernatural stuff and never told him about it.
Matt Bluestone is if Scully was trolling Mulder the whole time.
Right.
You're crazy, Mulder.
Gaslighting.
But actually, yeah, it's all real, and I know about the aliens.
And he does. I feel like there was an episode where he talks about, like, the East. Oh, did you know that Easter Island, the statues are based on aliens?
Yes.
And it's like, oh yeah, that actually is. That ends up being true.
Yeah, he says this crazy off-the-cuff thing that the Easter Island statues are based on aliens, and then later we get an episode where Goliath meets the alien on Easter Island. They do that a lot. They sprinkle in little moments, like just the smallest mention of something going on, only to come back to it like 40 episodes later.
Yeah.
Which I think makes the show incredibly rewatchable. Mm-hmm. Like, you can just watch it so many times. And I think that's just a product of the good storytelling and just how well planned the storytelling is.
God, we have so many characters to go through.
I mean, I think that's like indicative of how complex the lore is. And I think how balanced the writing is, too, that they introduce us to all of these things at a very appropriate pace. Mm-hmm. Like, the seeds are planted. There's you shared with me, Den of Geek has Essential Gargoyles watch list. If you don't have time to watch the whole series, but they do say in their watch list, you got to watch the whole first season, because there is not a wasted moment of the first season. Everything in season 1 sets up material that will be fleshed out for 65 episodes. And they pace it out really well. So you get a drop of this, and then you get to circle back to these characters or these plot lines that were introduced. It's almost kind of hard to not watch every episode, because every episode has something in it that contributes to the cohesive, big picture.
Very little filler in this show.
There's no filler. It really isn't. I mean, there are ones you can skip if you've seen it before, but honestly, if you haven't seen it before, watch them all, because they're all great. So yeah, some of our other side characters, some other plot points to talk about is there's the mutates. Mm-hmm. And
which are, I
don't want to dig into them too deep, because they're part of my 5 picks, so might save my thoughts on them.
Oh, okay.
But so they're clones. Mm-hmm. They're not clones.
They're genetically engineered attempts at making gargoyles.
Yeah. Trying to make their own gargoyles. They make these weird. They turn humans into weird animals.
Like jungle cats mixed with bats.
Who kind of look like gargoyles.
Yeah.
And then we have Coldstone, who is a gargoyle that is like part gargoyle and part cyborg. Like, they took pieces of broken gargoyle and used magic with science to kind of bring another gargoyle back to life.
That was ended up being 3 separate gargoyles smushed
3 gargoyle
together,
souls trapped in one body.
Who coincidentally all had a previous
love triangle.
Love triangle. Yeah. And I think this was only in scripts, but did you know what their names were?
I learned this only because you shared that link with me.
It was Othello, Iago, and Desdemona, which another They love their Shakespearean references in this show.
There's a lot of Shakespeare references. There's a lot of Indiana Jones references.
What were the
well.
Indiana Jones references?
Like just small things. Like there's an episode where they're in Nigeria and they're doing like the Anansi mythology, and they're in like a area with a bunch of spiders, and Elisa's mom just goes, "Spiders. Why did it have to be spiders?"
Oh, nice.
That's and then there's another episode where like Broadway says like no ticket when he
oh my god, that's so funny.
there's a lot of literary they do talk like offhand about Dostoevsky. Like there's a lot of literary and film references.
Fox says something along the lines of like Nietzsche's too butch.
Oh my god, yes. Why are you reading Sartre or something?
Yeah.
Like Nietzsche's too butch. That is a line to go down in the books. I wrote that down somewhere. I was like, Nietzsche's too butch. I don't know what that means, but I'm into it. So yeah, a lot of literary and film references, a lot of just like smart writing, the way they pace this out and kind of introduce us to these characters, which gives the show a lot of fuel to just stay fresh. But it's always building to something. From, the characters in the past, we constantly go back to what happened 1,000 years ago. It could be so simple to just be like Gargoyles. 1,000 years later, but they always go back to their origins. They always go back to the past. And then with these side characters, we do kind of continue to see how their lives kind of pan out. And we haven't really talked about the comics, which exist. But
which I really wish I had time to like delve into the comics before this.
I wish I'd brought my physical copies. So I'll give you some background on some of the comic stuff. There's a third season of Gargoyles, which is ignored by the comics.
For good reason.
Yeah, so Disney's whole model is that they do 65 episodes. And their whole reason for doing 65 episodes is the idea that you don't want to pay people for sticking around longer than 65 episodes. So if you want to keep the show on, you just change the name, make it a new show. But 65 episodes was the Disney Channel's model for all of their live action and animated shows. So the third season is beyond the 65 point, and it's actually called Gargoyles: The Goliath Chronicles. And it kind of, different writers, different direction, a lot more kid-friendly. Not that I think Gargoyles is good for kids. I think it's perfect for all audiences, really. And so the first episode of that third season is pretty much Greg Weisman's vision for like what would happen next with the Gargoyles. And then the rest is just...
So do they keep the quarrymen kind of?
The quarrymen. So the idea is like in the third season, the world knows about gargoyles now. New York knows. And so it's about the gargoyles trying to integrate themselves in the human world. And there's a hate group who doesn't want gargoyles around. They're called the quarrymen. All of that is part of what Greg Weisman intended. And that is what's fleshed out in the comics.
Yeah.
Which I've only recently learned there are more comics. Because there was a limited run of a few installments, and then the licensing fees for the Gargoyles content became too expensive for the publisher. So the comics stopped, which was abrupt. But I've now learned that they're comics again, so now I'm excited to see where the story would go. But like, it was all mapped out. Every side story, there's just a wealth of what was mapped out, including a comic spinoff called Bad Guys, which did get a few issues before it was also discontinued for the licensing reasons. And Bad Guys is about Dingo of the Pack.
Oh, yeah.
And the Matrix, who is a sentient being of nanobots that Dingo meets in Australia.
I didn't...
Teaming up with some other bad guys from the series. So it's like Suicide Squad, but... all the gargoyles, like side gargoyles villains that and it's like Suicide Squad in that it's not the main villains. It's not like Xanatos and Demona. No, it's about like side bad guys who had maybe a couple of episodes, and then they're trying to get their redemption by becoming good guys.
Yeah, bad guys who were not that, like they were bad, but they weren't maniacal.
Yeah,
because like Dingo, there was because the episode where like they get all their implants and stuff. Dingo is the only one that's like, I'm not like changing, I'm not mutating, I'm not getting these crazy like cyber implants. Just give me some power armor.
Just give me some power armor, yeah.
That's fine.
I don't want to be a wolf. I don't want to be a cyborg.
Yeah.
I want to be a normal dude with cool guns.
Hack off my arms and legs. Which, that episode has legit body horror in it. Like the like weird cyber spider.
I'm glad you brought up the body horror because like it's a fantasy show. It's a kid show. Like there's so much wild stuff in the show. Like you have genetic mutates that you just accept as normal people. Like there's so much wild stuff in the show, but they still manage to ground that in like the body horror of like you feel the character's emotions and you're like, man, What if this were real? And yeah, I think that's really cool. It's not just like a kid's show where they're just like, yeah, magic exists. They really make you think through the physical and like metaphysical implications of that.
Just consequences, emotional consequences for things.
That's a perfect way to say it.
Which, yeah, like the episode where they find the Egyptian god of death.
Whoa, yes.
Which that was almost my feels-worthy moment, but I ended up doing a different one. But just the whole idea of that's just such a complex, emotionally complex want that the kind of antagonist of that episode, he wants to bring his son back, and the was Isis, is that the god of death?
Anubis is the Egyptian god of death.
Anubis is like you can't. There's no reason to do that. The death is pointless. That's the point. Which is an amazing quote.
Yeah.
And that it's just not something you see in kids shows a lot.
They're so graceful with the way they wrestle with themes of love. Like there's, it's a kids show, but they have romance. They tell good love stories, and they tell stories about death and about loss and violence and the consequences of, guns and violence and body horror. Like it's all there, just done kind of gracefully. And I really love that about it.
And as far as relationships, I feel like there's a lot of the consequences of like breaking trusts too, which happens a lot with Demona. Happens a lot with trying to think what other.
Xanatos is like constantly an untrustworthy.
That's true.
You never know.
Fox.
Except with Fox, which is like the villains have a love story. Who needed that?
They're good.
They got married, they had a kid. Like that's insane that they put that level of depth into the villains' love story and kind of humanize them in that way. Fun fact about the Anubis episode: the actor who plays a man trying to resurrect his son, that's Tony Shalhoub.
Oh, was
Did you
it?
realize that?
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
That's amazing. There's so many. Okay, so this might be the time to talk about all the guest stars and the talent. So, Keith David plays Goliath. Jonathan Frakes, who otherwise known as William Riker, Commander William Riker from Star Trek, plays Xanatos, and it kind of seems to be like the character model inspiration as well.
Yeah, for sure.
It looks a lot like Jonathan Frakes. Marina Sirtis is Demona, who was Counselor Troy on Star Trek: The Next Generation. Puck is played by Brent Spiner, who was Data. Titania is played by Kate Mulgrew, who was Janeway on Voyager. Michael Dorn, who played Worf, was Coldstone.
I didn't realize some of this.
There's a ton. Nichelle Nichols, who's Uhura, plays Elisa's mother.
Oh wow! That's
LeVar
perfect.
Burton, who was Geordie LaForge, played Anansi. So many, a bunch of Star Trek people. Avery Brooks, who was Cisco in Deep Space Nine, played the Easter Island alien. Colm Meaney, who was Chief O'Brien, was a character in the Ireland episode.
Okay. I got Dietrich Bader.
Dietrich Bader was. Oh, nice.
I didn't even realize some of these. Cree Summer.
Oh, of course, Cree Summer's in it a ton. Jim Belushi was Fang. I had no idea.
Jim Belushi?
Is he the one that says kinky? Is
Yes,
Fang the one that says
that
kinky?
is Fang. Of course, that's Fang. Wow. Like so many people, so many talented people involved.
Kinky.
And I think the show is applauded for its diversity of actors too.
John Rhys Davies is Macbeth.
Oh yeah.
Who the Shakespearean actor, otherwise known as Gimli from Lord of the Rings, among another Indiana Jones connection. He was in that. Amazing cast list.
I think it points to like how it's fascinating to me that I know so many people love this show, but also in some ways it never truly got its flowers because of how well it's written, how amazing and powerful it is, how unique it is for the time it came out, and also how many talented people were involved in it. It's kind of mind-blowing that this show exists, really.
Oh, and Biff from Back to the Future is Matt Bluestone, Thomas Wilson.
That's wild. What a wild cast list.
Laura San Giacomo is Fox.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Sheena Easton. Okay, so yeah.
And I feel like a lot in this era, I feel like some of these, I want to say San Giacomo wasn't credited because it was seen as detrimental to her career, because being in an animated show at this time was kind of seen as slumming it.
Yeah, I
didn't want necessarily,
I would say this is like a prestige TV show. Like, I would say it's a work of art. It's a masterpiece. And definitely I think the people making it knew what they were making. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of us, it took us years to realize, like, oh, something amazing happened. Like, something amazing was created and put on the Disney Channel of all places.
Like, it's a show where they should 100% do like a reboot of it. They could.
Well, yeah. Okay. So I see in the chat, Cheshire, you're saying we need a proper remake.
Yep.
I did hear from someone, and I haven't done any additional research to confirm this, but someone brought up in some Discord the other day that Jordan Peele pitched a live-action Gargoyles movie to Disney, and they were like, pass.
That's crazy.
I don't know how you can't say, okay, like, extremely talented, hot now director, and like one of your best masterpieces, you don't want to make that happen. Okay, cool, fine. Here's a question, Corey. Maybe you can answer this one. If you could cast Goliath today, who would you cast?
I mean, it's really hard to beat Keith David. Like, I feel like if you did
keep Keith David.
If you did a live action version, it would probably be CG anyway, so he could still do the voice.
Yeah. And he still looks good. Like, he could easily be, the mocap model for Goliath.
That's true. But let's see but if we wanted to recast it, I don't know. That's a really tough one. I don't know. I'm going to complete blank.
I mean, I
can't.
It's Keith David. Keith David is Goliath, forever and always to me. And I would love for them to do a remake where he can reprise that role, because Goliath is the main. Goliath is the heart of the show. And it's interesting because he's a stoic character. Mm-hmm. He doesn't show a lot of his feelings, and yet he is the vessel for us, the audience. Like, and I think Keith David just brings this like regal, he's a larger than life creature. He gets who Goliath is, but he still makes him accessible to us, and we kind of feel Goliath's feelings really well. So yeah,
I have a feeling in like 20-30 minutes I'll like think of like, oh yeah, actually that actually would be a good recast. So we'll maybe touch on that again, because that's just how my brain works.
Let's jump into our 5 picks. So in preparing for this, Corey and I tried to not talk to each other as much as possible, so everything would come out fresh.
Sent a couple memes.
And
but that's about it.
Yeah, we came up with 5 sort of key points to share with each other, to kind of. So the first was the show in 5 words. If you had to summarize the show in 5 words, what would they be?
Want me to go first?
Well, yeah, because I have to pull mine up because I can't remember what my 5-word summary was.
I think my more cynical one, I'll do my actual one after this, but my more cynical one probably would have been something along the lines of like Batman meets Teenage Mutant Turtles. Because that'd be like the elevator pitch of it. But I think my actual one would be winged protectors make unusual friendships.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Winged protectors make unusual friendships. I like that because it really speaks to like the relationships, which, I mean, this is just good writing. Like the characters should be. And there's so many wild conceits and MacGuffins, and just like there's so much wild lore, but it still is about the characters and their development, and that's why it's good writing and a good story. Yeah,
no one does anything without it like making emotional sense.
Yeah. It feels so, for something so wild, it's so grounded. Okay, fantastic world building, cohesive storytelling.
Yep.
Because that's what it is.
Yeah.
They do the thing. And they do it well.
Yeah.
And it's so cohesive, and it's just so perfect and rewatchable. Can't speak of it enough.
Of course, a few plot holes here and there, but like remarkably few for the scope.
And if you're like a nerd who is like really into the lore of like Greg Weisman and everything that he's shared as being part of his vision, you know that some of those plot holes are addressed.
Oh,
like they kind of sprinkle Merlin in throughout the series, and in the comic there's whole arcs about Merlin and Arthur, who's like they've introduced King Arthur. He's
really
like a
touched
bit
on very lightly,
but there's more. Like every side character that's introduced, you can tell the creator had their story mapped out too, like infinite spin-offs, if you will.
Interesting.
What about your peak?
Peak, I think.
Peak moment of the show for you.
Peak moment would probably be the Gathering arc. Just that whole. I guess did just by episode. Just the idea of. I think that was kind of the culmination of a lot of the stuff that was being set up. First season, first half of the second season, and then that kind of really paid off a lot of the idea of Oberon's children and the third race.
Okay. Well, yeah, we haven't broken that. Like, break that down if you could. Like, in a nutshell, why is the Gathering the peak? Because what is the lore that they've built with the third race?
The third race is. So I guess the first two races are humans, gargoyles. And then third race is everything else. The third race is they call Oberon's children. Oberon being the like king of the fairies, king of the fae, creatures,
the fae people,
the king of anything magic, basically in this world. And so they were going. Is this before or after World Tour? This is before World Tour.
The Gathering is after the World Tour.
Oh, that's right. So the Gatherings after the World Tour, they've spent all this time going from country to country, showing how every country's culture and heritage goes back to this.
Worth mentioning in the show, there's a huge arc where our characters travel to every part of the world. And that's why I said at the beginning this is a multiverse of mythologies, because they try to make it seem as if every story, every culture's lore is actually tied to a cohesive mythology.
And so all of that is finally coming together with the Gathering. Oberon is calling all of his children back to Avalon, which Avalon is the kind of like hidden island where a lot of stuff happens. Yeah. It's kind of a key plot point, really. Like the fact
there's nothing that's not key, which is so. I just imagine, like, if you're unfamiliar with the show, it sounds like some kind of nerd gibberish.
And it is.
It sounds complicated, but when you watch it, like, that's the good writing. That's like
they pace it out in a really
kids could get this. It's a kids show, and it's this complicated, but it works.
Yeah. So bring it back to Avalon, and Oberon is probably the closest thing we have to like a simple villain, because he kind of has simple wants. He just wants power. He wants to bring his children back.
Yeah,
he
doesn't even want power because he doesn't need it.
He already has it.
He is Oberon.
He's
vibing.
The closest thing to a real god, really.
Yeah,
in this world, because it turns out all the other gods are just his children. Even Odin, the Allfather, is his child.
Yeah, all the gods of all the mythologies are all just the third race. They're all just the Fae people.
Right.
And Oberon is daddy.
Not just gods, but banshees, anything magical that's not a gargoyle. Is
like, they didn't have to go that hard. They could have just been like, we got gargoyles. Instead, they're like, no, we have everything.
I mean,
and sci-fi.
And
cyberpunk.
This could have easily just been like, okay, they're just kind of like in New York and fighting
Ninja Turtles fighting. Yeah.
Xanatos, every week he has some weird thing and they foil it, and that was it. That could have been it. They dropped that real quick.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of the first season in a way, even though there's a lot of stuff set up.
But they were always building towards the more, which is important.
So yeah, I think the Gathering, I feel like that's a high point, just because, and it was hard to choose because there's so many good moments in the show, but I feel like that was a good kind of climax of the series. Even though after that there's still great stuff and even more building toward the ends of the series, of the season.
Incredibly cohesive.
So what was your high point?
My peak, like, for me, the peak of the show, like, when I just like really felt emotionally hit by the show, was the City of Stone arc. So this is season 2, episodes like 9 through 12, because it's 4 episodes. So
they do that a lot in this show. That's several episode arcs.
Oh, because it's complicated. But I was doing the rewatch at home, and my boyfriend is like, well, why is Demona alive? Do they ever explain why she's alive? Because she wasn't cursed. So if they've been frozen for 1,000 years, how does this other gargoyle just come out of the woodwork? And so City of Stone is where we finally get the full tea on Demona and why she has been alive for 1,000 years, and why she is the way that she is. Like, why is she always, trying to start? And so that to me is just incredible storytelling. Not just the coolness of like, oh, Macbeth, and that's a whole plot, and we're going to show you how these two characters are linked. But also just really understanding Demona's motives overall. And I think so. The episode, the first episode of the 4-episode arc begins with a flashback to the past. And we're reminded, the Gargoyles were betrayed. They were all destroyed by day, except for Goliath and a few others. And Goliath and the others get turned to stone. Well, Demona is the one who orchestrated all of that, essentially.
Right.
She was trying to make deals. She was trying to get rid of the humans. And she ended up resulting in the destruction of her own clan. And when she comes back to discover all of the broken gargoyles, and then the gargoyles that aren't dead are stone at night, so there's something wrong with them. She realizes everything is gone. She picks up the rubble and she says, "What have I?" And then she stops and says, "What have they done?" And that's in the first episode of this 4-episode arc. It's subtle. It's a small moment, but it comes back to that 4 episodes later when you realize everything that Demona suffers through is all her fault. And she has this moment of clarity where she's like, but they did this. And these witches, the weird sisters who are involved, the weird sisters are grilling her. It's like, yeah, but who did that to them? And she's like, but they did this to me. And like, but who started? Like, they finally make her realize, and she's sobbing. And then she, you know, you need the context of the story of these episodes, but it's a moment where she is sobbing and she basically gives them the password to undo the horrible plan that she's done. And she says the access code is alone. And I tweeted a week or two ago, some images, some still images from Gargoyle, just like 4 images that to me are like incredible moments from the series, but I didn't give any context. And I just said, Gargoyles went so hard. And one of the stills is Demona crying. And so many people immediately recognized that moment, like, and like said the password is alone. And just the amount of people that like knew that emotional buildup of that 4-episode arc just from that one still just tells me how good the writing is. So to me, that is the peak. And then of course it's heartbreaking because Demona does realize it's all my fault, but within just a few seconds of being out of that moment, like by the end of the episode, she's back to like, no, I did nothing wrong. Humans, kill all the humans. Like, she doesn't learn. It's her fatal flaw.
It seemed like the weird sisters were able to kind of lift her like own mind fog.
Yes.
In a way. Like they didn't like magically like force her to do anything. They just kind of gave her a moment of clarity, like you said, and that was enough. The fact that she was able to realize that she's only hurting herself in this whole scheme of things. Time and time again, every time they go back to her story and show her origins, you see the decisions that she make and that build in a logical way, but every time it's trying to seek revenge out of some weird sense of honor that she has, and it always comes back to bite her. And it's, you know, on par with some sort of Shakespearean tragedy.
Yeah. And they don't cheapen it. You know, it would be so easy for, you know, everybody gets a redemption arc. Demona doesn't have a redemption arc.
No.
You understand her fully and you even feel for her, but she's not redeemed. She continues to be a dick to everybody for the rest of the show, you know, but you understand her. And I feel like so many media don't give that level of thought to their villains.
No. And
that's why it's the peak for me.
I think it's notable to mention that not only does she not get a redemption, but there are times when she could have had redemptions and it seemed like a conscious choice where no, she still has she's going to be fueled by her own rage and grief that she refuses to let go, because there are a few villains that do get redemptions in this show, and it does a great job of not only does she not get a redemption, but she's not one-dimensional, which I feel like that's an excuse of like, okay, a villain's not going to get a redemption because they're just evil and they want whatever. But no, she's not. It's hard to say that I guess she is evil really because she's selfish.
She's evil because she does want to kill I mean, she says multiple times, I want to wipe out the human race, which, like, that's a pretty big evil, most people would say.
She's killed several people
and she has murdered people. On screen, she has murdered people,
in that City of Stone arc, she shatters at least half a dozen people on screen, and it's heavily implied that once you're shattered, like, that's it. Yeah. Even Puck's magic, I guess. They didn't really explain.
They don't acknowledge if the people who were turned to stone and crushed by Demona are dead. Yeah.
I don't think so.
So what about valleys? If these are the best things about the show. What's your valley? What's the lowest point or element of the show?
So it's all season 3.
All of season.
If you can say that. So I guess it's
that's
not
fair.
technically, but specifically, I did put the ransom as, and that's like episode 2 of season 3 when the quarrymen steal
the core writers
Alex,
are gone.
steal Alex, Xanatos, and Fox's son,
Hmm.
and Fox in particular, it's just so out of character for her. She becomes practically hysterical at the fact of losing her son, which is a very emotional thing, and I don't want to discount that, maybe she would be devastated by that, but everything that they've done up until that point showed Fox as being very proactive. Like it feels like she would actively go out and seek revenge and find.
When Oberon tries to take her kid, unlocks magic powers that she didn't know she had.
That's true. That's so true. And there's none of that.
She's
in
not
there.
she's not getting beaten down. Yeah.
And even Xanatos in that episode, like, he's making speeches and he's saying we're going to do this, but he doesn't actually do anything. It's all the Gargoyles doing it. And it just doesn't make sense character-wise. And it just felt like that's emblematic of the fact that these new writers that came in really didn't get the show at all. Like, they tried their best, I'm sure, but they just didn't quite have that same level of understanding and that same sensitivity.
And the consistency of the characters. Like, it's just, it's good writing. I've said that a lot, but that's what it is. That's what it takes.
And for the era, Gargoyles had amazing female characters. Like, Elisa's an amazing character. Fox is an amazing character. And just the idea of Damona's an amazing character.
And Elisa is a biracial character, too,
Right.
which I think, how often are we seeing women of color as our heroines in the 90s on kids' shows,
Is she, I know she's at least part Native American, part black,
Yeah.
part
Yeah. Well,
Sub-Saharan
she says that her
African.
mom was born and raised in New York, but that her mom has Nigerian heritage.
Right.
So.
But I
and we
wonder
know
if
that
her mother is
dad
supposed
is
to be
Navajo, I think.
Is it Navajo? I couldn't remember if they said specifically what
I don't think
tribe.
they say specifically, but looking at the lore of when they go to Arizona, and
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
it could be a different one though.
I did wonder if maybe she was supposed to, if Elisa's mother was supposed to be maybe part Latin as well. Which,
They don't
whatever.
address it. They just say she has Nigerian heritage, but she was
Okay.
born and raised in New York. So we know she's a first generation immigrant if her parents were immigrants.
Okay.
They just say Nigerian heritage. They don't really go any deeper than that.
So, yes, biracial main character who's not a stereotype.
None of all the women are have depth.
Yeah. And especially for the era, even now, it seems like they're great characters. But in season 3, it did feel like the writers didn't get that, and they were damsels. Lisa's like in a dress for most of the first episode because I think her and Goliath were going on a date or something. A date.
Yes.
And so that's why they had her in a dress. But it just seems so out of character for her. She's never really shown to be in a dress before that, I don't think, or at least not in any sort of action context.
Only in the Halloween episode.
Oh, that's right, where they go as Beauty and the Beast.
Where, Elisa Maza cosplaying as Belle and wielding her gun is a moment.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's so... Yeah, so even within the context of the show, she never felt helpless.
No,
at all.
absolutely not. No.
And in season 3, suddenly she's helpless. And it's just like so against the kind of themes of the show.
I mean, that's a fair, Valley. And it's not the same creators.
No. But as far... I didn't think of a Valley for like the actual run, the original...
No,
first
I
two
think that
seasons.
I think because you can't
Because it's all really
because
good.
it's a perfect
it's really
show.
Hard.
I will say for me, if I had to pick a Valley, specifically an episode would be Mark of the Panther, which is
interesting.
I have mixed feelings because I love that episode because it is Elisa's mom and we get to see and I love the Anansi story and all the West African mythology that they bring in. I love that part of the story and it's about Elisa's relationship with her mom. And that's the only time you really see Elisa as a vulnerable character is when she's interacting with her family, right?
Right.
And that's great, but what drags it down, and this would be my Valley more broadly, is just Angela.
Oh, interesting.
Angela, Goliath's daughter that they find all the gargoyles that survived in a magical place, and Angela comes with Goliath and goes on all of the journeys. And for me, her character just never did anything for me. I never was compelled by her story. Like, they tried to give her thing is that she wants to know her dad, and Goliath won't acknowledge he's her biological dad or whatever, because that's not the Gargoyle way. But it just comes across as kind of whiny and vapid and just not really very meaningful. So that whole episode is her just being real pouty, honestly, being real pouty. Like, Elisa's like talking about her relationship with her mom, and Angela's just like pointedly looking at Goliath like, yeah, parents should blah blah blah. It's just like, it's very childish and just not compelling. So Angela to me was never a character that I got excited about adding to the roster.
Yeah, like they could have done more with her, because she was raised in kind of a vacuum in a weird way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Like I mean, talk about a summer child. Like, they lived in this like magical world where literally no one else except for their clan, the eggs, lived for presumably at least
40,
20-ish
50 years, yeah.
Oh, even more?
You're right, she's only like 20.
But they say
Gargoyles age half the speed of humans. So yeah. And
so,
if you think about Tom, the little boy,
right, he looks
like he's in his 40s or 50s.
Yeah.
So probably 40 or 50 years.
Yeah. So I feel like there could have been more of her
innocence.
Yeah, her coming to terms with like this new world that is very foreign to her, and all these situations that are almost unthinkable to her, all the betrayal and deceit that she's seeing, that she would not be used to, and that's not really addressed.
Yeah, like, she's fine, but to me, she doesn't add anything to the show. And the fact that there is such a long chunk of episodes where we only get to see the characters on the tour, which is Goliath, Elisa, Bronx, and Angela, and we don't get to see our core characters. You know, they bounce back to them, but for a while we don't get to be home in Manhattan seeing those characters. And so to me,
third of the season, really.
Yeah, to me, that Angela is taking up space in my mind is just kind of like a missed opportunity for character development that I care about.
Right.
That's my value.
She was basically a tool for Goliath's character development.
Yeah.
And that's kind of...
She's not a character. Yeah, she's maybe the only weekly written character to me.
Yeah. Just, and to be a love interest for some of the Manhattan Gargoyles.
Here we go. In chat, we have another valley it does suffer from 90s fight scene syndrome, with all the combat being super one note.
Yeah. There's a few good action sequences, but for the most part it is.
I can see how a lot of it does fall flat, but there are some fight scenes, like you mentioned Macbeth and Demona fighting. There are some fight scenes in that are just beautiful and well thought out, and animation wise. I
would chalk that up to probably like budget limitations.
Absolutely. I'm sure they recycled some combat footage multiple times to get where you needed to be with that.
I did notice that a lot of the fight scenes they'll do, like, they never show a punch impacting. They always cut to like a flash of red, a frame of red. So there's a lot of like POV shot of like a fist coming in and then flash of red, and then you see someone flying back.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's probably a censorship thing mixed with a budget thing. The action sequences, the fight scenes especially. I think there's good action scenes, fight scenes maybe not so much.
That's fair. So who for you is, you said you maybe didn't get this one, and it's okay, but do you have an underrated character, maybe an unsung hero?
Yeah, this one was hard because there's so many good characters, and also I don't know who would be underrated because I'm not like in the fandom or anything.
Fair, yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe Fox would be like an underrated character, as far as like she had a lot of the same kind of like smarts that Xanatos did, but it was only really shown within the context of her relationship with Xanatos. And so maybe narratively they could have done more of her.
Yeah, I mean, we could frame it a different way. Not just a character that's underrated by fans, but what's a character or a plot line that we want more of.
Yeah.
And I think when I think like what did they not hit on? It's Fox. How did Fox and Xanatos meet? We learn about Fox's parents, which is cool.
Yep.
But there's a whole prequel about Fox, really.
There could be.
I mean, there could be so much there. So I would agree with you on that.
Renaud is
Renard, her father's assistant, who Owen modeled himself out.
Right.
I mean, there's a ton there that's like sprinkled in, but yeah, she's not a featured character a lot. She's mostly just, while being well written, we don't see it as much.
And the same could be said for so many of the characters in here, just because there's only so much time.
There's only so much you could do with a 20-minute show, and they did way more than they had any right to do with what they had. I think my underrated character would be Hudson.
Yeah.
Just because it's a kid's show, and what kid is like, I really like the old man character.
Kids love Ed Asner.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, like, they give Hudson some really solid episodes, and that Goliath always defends Hudson, you know, and I think he's a very well-rounded character for something that could just be the old man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I could do more. I could do more Hudson backstory, honestly, myself.
I do like that he's the former leader of the clan.
Yeah.
He passed it down to Goliath, and then that's it. Like, he didn't want to. He wanted to kind of enjoy his retirement. In his, like, literally in his lazy boy,
and he wants to watch TV. He's like, "Do you want to come?" I'm like, no, I don't. I don't want to go patrol. I want to watch TV. I love all the gags about Hudson watching TV with the dog, because that I don't know. I just think it's a good gag.
I do love how he got his name. I kind of love the whole idea of, like, gargoyles don't have names.
The dialogue in that whole scene is beautiful.
It's like, does the sky have a name? Does the river have a name? He's like, yeah, the river does have a name. It's the Hudson River.
Then like, I shall be the Hudson as well.
Fine, I will do it. Well, which is, speaking of names, I did find it interesting that Goliath was literally named after the biblical Goliath, the Philistine character, man of biblical times. They specifically call that out in, like, the first episode.
Yeah.
And I am embarrassed that I didn't realize that Xanatos' first name was David.
David Xanatos.
So David and Goliath. I know, right?
I know Xanatos' name. I'm just, oh my God, that's so perfect. There's so many small things like that. Like, there's so much discovery, even if you've seen the show a lot, and I've seen the show a lot.
Yeah, and the fact that, you know, he physically, Xanatos is weaker, but monetarily and, like, power-wise, he's much bigger than...
His slingshot is his fat wallet.
Right?
He's... I mean, there's so much about that show that's just so 90s. There definitely is a kind of a turn your nose up at capitalism, but also kind of...
Capitalism solves a lot of problems in this show.
Yeah. It's very 90s in its politics. We don't have to go any deeper than that, but it feels like the 90s, for sure. Finally, what was our last pick? Feels-worthy moment. Okay, that's a good denouement. What's your feels-worthy moment of the show?
Okay, so mine was the episode Cloudfathers that I watched this morning.
I love that episode so much.
And the whole episode, Elisa and her sister are asking the father, "Are you gonna go visit Grandpa while you're here?" He's like, "No, we're not gonna do that." Thinking that, okay,
Grandpa lives here.
He lives here. We're gonna go visit him and see. And then at the end of the episode, he goes and visits his father, and it turns out it's a gravestone. And he kind of reconciles with his father too late, and saying that, "I wish I could have told you when you're alive that I love and respect you, and I was too stubborn to realize, to tell you that earlier, and we could have had more time together." And as I was watching, I was like, "Oh my God, that is heartbreaking."
It is, and think of, like, talk about a side character that we don't need to know more about. It's just Elisa's dad. We've seen him a handful of times, like.
He didn't hospital scenes.
Yeah, he didn't need to have that backstory, but we get to learn about him as a young man. We get to see the conflict of generations within, like, the indigenous community of, you know, the dad kind of, "I want to go to New York. I don't want to, you know, honor the traditions of our people." You get a whole lot in that 20-minute episode that's not just about this one character and his beautiful whole backstory, but also just, like, marginalized people.
Right.
and you know,
Yeah.
and keeping those traditions alive and what that means and what that looks like in marginalized communities. So yeah, how can you do all of that in 20 minutes? It's amazing.
Do you have this clip pulled up? You gonna?
It's the end of the episode.
Yeah. You should play it. We'll just watch it. We'll do that for for the feels worthy.
No, because you got to feel it.
Yeah.
Really real.
Let's go visit your grandfather.
Oh, perfect. Perfect timing.
Hi, Pop. We sure did fight a lot, didn't we? I guess it was hard to admit that you might be right. Even harder after you were gone. That would have meant admitting that I wasted all those years we were apart. Years we could have shared. It's too late to say I'm sorry. I only wish there was some way to let you know how much I've always loved and respected you.
I think he knows, Dad. I think he knows.
And the fact that he's wearing the coyote costume, which is, you know, they talk about the lore, the myth of the coyote and the dances. The fact that he's wearing that when his whole arc is he wanted to reject his family and his traditions, and he wanted to live in, you know, the modern world or whatever he says.
New York City.
New York City. I'm going to the big city. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that maybe wouldn't be a thing I would have thought of. But it says so much about the show that's such a powerful moment. And it didn't have to be. It didn't have to be there. But they tell a whole story about Elisa's dad in one small episode.
And they could have had like a cameo or something for the dad at the end, just made it a joke, a one-off joke or something. And no, they wanted to really gut punch you.
Yeah, no, I love that and that's the first time we ever mention Elisa's background, like being part Native American. They don't really touch on it. That's the only time we learn about it. And it's just like, oh, there's this whole other like cultural complexity to her family that we didn't know about initially. And like her dad moving to the city and leaving Arizona. So my feels-worthy moment is actually also related to Elisa and her family.
Oh, nice.
For me, the most gut-wrenching feels-worthy, and by feels I mean like the bad feels, because I mean it's heartbreaking. The biggest heartbreak for me, it's a season 2, episode 2, Metamorphosis. So in this episode, we've already had kind of a teaser in season 1. We get to meet Elisa's brother Derek, and Derek gets hired by Xanatos, which obviously creates a rift between them. So there's tension between Elisa and her brother because he works for Xanatos and she hates Xanatos. And then through this series of Xanatosian, insane lies, manipulation, he becomes mutated. Like Elisa's brother turns into a monster. This scene, before we watch it, there is a voice acting choice. There's a voice acting moment where Derek realizes what's happened to him. He realizes, like, I've become... oh, you know what? It's not this scene. It's not this scene. It's a later scene when he's already become a monster. And he realizes, he thinks Dr. Savarius, which this is the introduction of a great side character who fakes his elaborate death. It's so wild. It's so Tim Curry. But he thinks that the doctor is going to make him an antidote. And the antidote is dropped. And he realizes, like, with finality, like, he's kind of before, he's like, I'm going to get cured. This isn't real. And this is like the body horror moment where he realizes the antidote is gone. He is no longer a man. He is mutated and he's trapped in this body he doesn't want. And the voice actor just screams, no, in a way that just, like, punches you in the gut. Like, it's a good story, but it is good acting. Yeah.
That he immediately grabs, which should have been a tip-off.
What a death scene. Fake death.
No pulse. He's dead.
He can't be dead. He's my one chance.
I'm sorry.
No! I only needed a few more seconds! It's the Gargoyles' fault. They'll pay for this. If it takes my last breath, they'll pay.
Come on. We have to get you out before the police show up. Unless you wanted Lisa to see you like this.
No!
Then come on. We'll find a cure for you and the others. I promise you that.
It's okay. You're among friends.
Okay. Yeah. This the moment I guess is a little later in the episode, but like this whole episode, for me has the feels because of the body horror, because of the way the actors and the writers, like you feel the torment, and then the character Maggie as well is that she's another woman who's been turned into a monster, and she meets our gargoyles, and she meets Brooklyn, who's kind of into her, and he's like, oh, lady, finally. And she's like disgusted with him. And that to me is like a secondary feels layer, like the devastation of Elisa's brother. The episode ends with Elisa just sobbing. Like that's the end of the episode. She's just sobbing, and then fade to credits. Like, because she realizes that her brother has become a monster, and there's this division between them, and it's just this unthinkable thing.
It was a division that was building anyway because of him working for Xanatos, and then realizing that Xanatos kind of orchestrated this whole thing.
This elaborate thing just to turn her brother into a monster, which seems weirdly personal. Like it's almost like Xanatos did all of that just to mess with her, which is another layer of villainy that's just kind of insane. But also this story of Maggie being like, I'm not a monster like you. Like, Brooklyn, this is who you are. I'm a human who was changed. And when you see Brooklyn's heartbreak, that she just like totally rejects him, that to me is important too, because you can see the loneliness that the gargoyles have, being the only gargoyles. Until Angela shows up, no other lady gargoyles, so they truly feel kind of alone. This episode is just gut-wrenching.
The idea of these mutates is interesting. Just that they are, monsters. They're these humans who were thrown in, and most of them I think were criminals. It seemed like. I think they're like a couple of them were.
I don't think they're even criminals. I think maybe one of them is a criminal, and the rest are just like homeless people or people that were in bad circumstances that got kind of tricked into becoming science experiments. And then Derek, who's just like insanely manipulated by Xanatos to fall into the trap.
It just feels like the whole thing with Derek. It did feel like, again, like it was specifically, I guess, to mess with Elisa, but by messing with Elisa, it's further messing with Goliath. I think that was kind of the inroad there.
And he's obsessed with Goliath, and that's Xanatos' whole thing.
Almost to the point of a fetish.
Yeah.
And like, I wouldn't be surprised if, of course, they'd never show this, but when like Xanatos and Fox are getting intimate, that he's wearing like the like Goliath outfit or something. Like that would not be out of character for him.
Can I put on the gargoyles mask tonight? Yeah, I could see it.
And that's just his weird obsession with specifically Goliath, but gargoyles in general.
Yeah. And I think the mutate storyline too really speaks to me, because the emotional realness of the story is there, but it's also, again, that point where it's not about magic. Like, there's so much magic. There are gargoyles that are really a race of, creatures, and there's all of these things that we see throughout the series. But in this episode, we see humans being transformed into monsters through science. And I think that's just an interesting juxtaposition that those two things exist in the same series so seamlessly.
Yeah. And I think that just speaks to, just the great writing is that no matter how fantastic things are, it's not going to be interesting unless you have that emotional core to it. No matter how many cool stuff is happening on screen, no one's going to care unless we feel for these characters. And they do such a good job of doing that in this show.
I'm glad that we did this. I'm glad that it gave me a reason to rewatch the show. Because, I'm just appreciating again and again. It's a work of art. It's a masterpiece of storytelling, of character development. And it's just a 90s kid show. It's just a Saturday morning cartoon, y'all. And that's the power of it.
And I feel like we still barely scratched the surface of this. Like, didn't really talk much about like the pack, other than kind of like service level. Didn't talk much about just the whole idea of Xanatos and his child, like what his motivations were there. There's just so much. Or even we didn't talk about Elisa and Delias, like, will they, won't they?
Oh yeah, there's like the whole love story between our two main characters is
Yeah.
Elisa and Goliath. Yeah.
And it's again heartbreaking because they know they can never be together, but there's still something there.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we could also, like, I feel us drifting towards our natural conclusion, but like, you know, we could talk about the legacy of Gargoyles in the diversity of the cast, in the sort of cultural diversity of the storytelling is really important, and that representation is really important. There's also a lot of like queer coding in the show.
No doubt.
That was super important in the 90s. I mean, this was an era for us, you know, coming to terms with queer representation in media. And I think it's there. I think there's a lot of stuff that's there if you want it to be, but it doesn't have to be, because again, it can be accessible to children or to just a casual viewer who wants to think like a child. That sounded kind of pandering, but yeah.
I like the term all ages.
All ages. It is. It's just good. It's just good. In conclusion,
it's good storytelling.
Gargoyles. It's just good.
Can we play one more clip?
Yeah.
Kind of like us. I want to do the basically last scene of season 2.
Okay.
Just because not only is it a very emotional moment, but I feel like the animation specifically, and we didn't touch on like animation, like because I feel like there's certain.
So then maybe that's a question for you, for Mitchell, for chat, for anyone. Thank you also for listening and watching. If you are, you know, what's next for Disco Lemonade? Do we need another Gargoyles episode? What other shows give you this kind of a vibe and feel? What other hidden gems? You know, and coming up with the name. For our little discussion here today, you know, Disco Lemonade is a reference to a song, but it's also
what song is it referencing?
What, you don't know? Sex and Candy.
Oh,
like Disco Lemonade.
Oh,
yeah. It's just such a silly little phrase in that song, but I've always liked the way that it feels. But also, I know this from our friend who works in I don't even know what you call it, like design. They use the word disco a lot for materials that have been discontinued.
Oh, interesting.
And so I like the idea of, I love, you know, disco and all the power and magic that disco represents, but also the idea of, you know, unearthing media that has been discontinued.
Interesting. I like that.
So yeah, if anyone in chat has suggestions for discontinued or disco vibe media that we should dig into. Oh, thank you, Cheshire. I like the format of the show. I like the trip down memory lane. Like an episode on horror cartoons, Real Monsters,
Ooh.
Courage the Cowardly Dog. Yes. Put it on the list.
There's
Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Interesting. There's a few like there's a couple like Saturday morning cartoons that were very short lived that I would like to revisit. Like Gravedale High.
Oh.
Do you that probably
I don't know that.
That was Rick Moranis as a high school teacher at a like monster high school. He was like the only human. It's like Welcome Back
I've never
Kotter,
heard of this.
but with like movie monsters.
Oh my god, that's perfect.
The Where's Waldo cartoon.
Reboot?
Oh my god. Oh, we should do Reboot. Oh
Bump,
my god.
Bump in the Night?
Yeah. Oh my god. Yes.
Okay.
So these ones I did see because they were on network television.
Yeah. So there's fuel.
The Tick. I would love to go through The Tick again. The Tick, I feel like you could trace The Tick all the way through to like The Boys easily. Modern, just the way that we interact with superhero genre today basically started with The Tick, I would say. Maybe Watchmen, but the idea that like it's taking less seriously.
Oh man.
And I think The Tick would be a good one too. Reboot would be a good one. Like I think there's a lot of fuel for that. As much as I would love to talk about Gargoyles more, I think there's so many things.
No, well that's great. That has me excited. I can't wait for our next opportunity to dive into media. But let's watch this last clip because I don't know what you're gonna pick and I'm excited for it.
And I specifically, not only is there an amazing moment, but I specifically want to point out I feel like they really bumped up the animation, probably because they thought it was going to be their actual last episode. Right. And it's just gorgeous. It looks like it's a really well done anime, in which I think a lot of the animation studios were out of Japan at the time. And especially the first. Sorry, I keep going these tangents. Especially the first season.
There's too much packed into this one little show to not go on tangents. There's just so much.
Well, especially the first season, you could tell the anime influence of it, and almost some scenes almost look like they came out of Akira or something. Just gorgeous. So this one I definitely want to just. I think it's a good one to go out on.
Yeah.
And so it begins. Gargoyles Chapter 2. Or is it 3? I've lost count.
Meta joke.
So, things have come full circle.
Somehow they always do. You know how I feel about you, right?
How we both feel. Yes.
Good. Welcome home, Goliath. Welcome home.
Just that rotation on the tower is gorgeous. Shot of the Twin Towers.
Oh wow, yeah.
There's a few shots of the Twin Towers. In
Yeah,
this show
I
that
mean
feel
it's
a little
an
foreboding.
iconic piece of the New York sky. That's how you end a series. Now, even though it wasn't the end, and even though I know I'm going to check out the new comics that are coming out, and I hope that everyone does. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, chat. Thank you, Mitchell, for running the show.
Yeah, Mitchell.
And I hope that if you enjoyed what we did here today, that you come join us again.